Welcome back to Fresh Outlook, everybody. I'm your host, Logan Crawford. The FCC is proposing regulating the internet service as a public utility, saying it is the right path to net neutrality. The plan would also, for the first time, give the FCC broad enforcement powers to police practices in the marketplace and a broad future conduct standard to cover unforeseen problems. Take a look.
The issue of whether or not internet service providers can legally control connection speed, access, or interrupt web browsing with commercials are some of the core issues around net neutrality. Net neutrality became a hornet's nest which swarmed when the FCC Chair Tom Wheeler proposed rules which public interest groups worried would create fast lanes for companies that pay up and relegate others to slow lanes. Now, before the Federal Communications Commission can make rules, there is a period of public comments. And this issue brought in nearly 4 million comments to the FCC. President Obama sided with public interest.
The idea of net neutrality has unleashed the power of the internet and given innovators the chance to thrive. And that's why I'm urging the Federal Communications Commission to do everything they can to protect net neutrality for everyone.
Shares of major internet service providers Comcast Corporation and Time Warner Cable fell sharply after the announcement.
We are back live on set here on Fresh Outlook. Let me introduce you to the Fresh Outlook think tank. I am joined by Matt Tyrmand, Telecom Portfolio Manager, and also from openbooks.com. I'm also joined by Dr. Jose Lopez of Seton Hall University, who is our science guy. And joining us via Skype is Dr. Jonathan Askin of Brooklyn Law School. Jonathan, let me start with you and ask you, what is net neutrality? We've heard it a million times. It doesn't really sink into us people who are learning impaired.
The problem is net neutrality is a very inartful term for a very simple concept. And the concept is to ensure that the end user can maximize control over their internet and communications experience without the controller of the pipe, the carrier, determining what the user can do when they're online, what content they can receive, what apps they can access, what media they can stream.
But John, right now it seems like that's how it is. And it seems like somebody's going to control it. Either free enterprise is going to control it or the government. And I think you've heard my political leanings. I'm a little libertarian. I'd rather let free enterprise control it. What are your thoughts?
Well, frankly, my leanings are libertarian as well. And I feel like we've got the opportunity to let a million flowers bloom online, but for the fact that every user has one or two gatekeepers to the open internet. So we're talking about one very simple principle. Make sure that gate is open and as wide as possible so that it's a user and not Verizon or Comcast or that other intermediary who can control what access they can receive. I would think from a libertarian perspective, you would want as many options as possible. And those options only come when it's the user who has the authority to figure out what they want to do with their wide open internet experience.
Okay, let's turn to our big government guy, Jose Lopez. I'm just kidding you, Jose. Talk to me about your thoughts on net neutrality. Is this something where you want to see the government intervene?
Yes,
okay.
I do. I think it's one of those areas where there's so many players in the field right now that if we do truly have a capitalistic economic system, some of them have to get weeded out. And that is happening right now. But the government has to also help regulate for the public interest. I mean, this is a question of what is the purpose of government? That's the first thing that a lot of people have. The purpose of government is for the betterment of its population. And this is one of the things. The internet right now it's at a stage where it's a necessity for all of the American and the world's population. They need it to do their work, to prosper, and to do well. So, and if that's being infringed upon, which I think a lot of the companies are doing these days, if they're talking about regulating the pipeline where some groups have faster internet service or get faster, better service than other people does, what that does, it just really stops our development and our progress.
Let me turn to Matt. Matt, what are your thoughts about this? I know you're obvious. I would think you're for net neutrality, but maybe not imposed by the government.
I am all about about all sorts of neutrality, but when the government comes in and regulates, there's nothing neutral about it. They are right now picking winners and losers. You know who the big winner from this term, net neutrality, which I think is a misnomer? It's Netflix. Netflix during prime time clogs up the quote-unquote pathways with 34% of the volume.
But I'm on it, Jose's on it, you're on it.
And you know what? Netflix there should be a prioritization, and if Netflix is clogging up that capacity, they should pay for it in the free market, and those costs should be passed on to the consumer. The end effect of what's going to happen here is by picking this this level of winning and losing, a company like Netflix that gobbles up so much capacity, is that the providers, Comcast, Verizon, and there are many competitive providers out there, they are going to have less incentive to upgrade networks. So when Netflix then comes out with its newest iteration of data delivery, and it's a higher definition, and it's going to clog up more of the bandwidth, we're going to see more cloggages. We're going to see much more. And that's what always happens when the government comes in and says, we're doing this for your best interest. The unintended consequences here, to anybody who really is involved in the telecom markets, everyone sees the writing on the wall. You're going to see much, much worse networks.
Tell me about the FCC chairman, his role in all of this, and do you see him as overreaching?
Absolutely. So Tom Wheeler, very interestingly enough, is from industry, from the lobbying side of industry. He ran NCTA and CTIA, which are the two biggest lobbying groups in telecommunications. And so he spent his career lobbying for government to protect his industries. It's always been sort of a Faustian bargain between most of the Fortune 100, Fortune 500, and government. We don't have free markets, as you and I have talked about before. It's very, very anti-competitive. There's a lot of cronyism and protectionism, and that's what the lobbying industry exists to do. This guy has been the leading telco lobbyist who has been more concerned with grabbing power and designating it because that provides clarity, which they can then buy influence in and buy privilege in. And what you see now with this FCC, you've got a 5-person panel who is going to be voting on this 350-page bill on February 26th. There's 2 Democrat appointees, 2 Republican appointees, and Wheeler appointed by Obama. Everyone knows this thing's going to pass 3-2 on a straight party line vote. But the real interesting thing is, just like Obamacare, they won't allow anyone to see it. Nobody is allowed to read this bill. Obviously, some lobbyists know how it's going to affect their sub-industries because everything in D.C. leaks out.
But this is the most transparent administration in the history of Washington. Let's turn to Jonathan in Washington. Jonathan, what are your thoughts on that? Is there going to be winners and losers, and it just depends on who the winners and losers will be, whether it's governmental winners and big industry winners? What are your thoughts?
Well, we haven't seen the multi-100-page document, so we can't fully assess who the winners and losers are. The goal is to make this as neutral as possible in order. I think Matt misstates when he says that the big winner is Netflix. I frankly think that the big winner is likely the Netflix of the next generation. Now, Netflix has the capacity to pay for paid prioritization. What about the small upstart video provider that wants to take on Netflix and take on Comcast video offerings and Time Warner? They're the ones that can't pay for paid prioritization, and they're the ones that consumers will never have access to, but for a concept that ensures that that end user can reach that content that otherwise doesn't have the wherewithal to reach them.
But Jonathan, who's actually in Brooklyn, not Washington, D.C., I'd like to start up my own TV network, but I don't have the wherewithal to do that either. I mean, there's some disparities in life. That's just how it is, right?
No, you absolutely do have the wherewithal to start your own TV network. That's the power of the internet.
Yeah.
You live in a world right now in the 21st century where you have the power of the largest media empires of 100 years ago. Yeah. You have the power of one person to reach billions of people if, in fact, we have a principle that says you have the ability to reach the end user without the gatekeeper saying you are less worthy than Comcast, than Fox, than Netflix.
All right, Jose, you're agreeing with that, and I'll let you get to that after that, Matt.
The dirty word here, and if this is a debate people were having in the 1920s, so this is deja vu all over again, is regulation. This is like electricity. This is like the telephone companies. AT&T survived that. All of the Con Edison and Edison's companies, all of that survived that. Electricity is a necessity. I don't know if anyone will disagree with me in the 21st century on that. Telephone is something that is also a necessity there. These are things that are regulated by government that everyone has. I believe every city, every kid, every person should have an ability to have access to broadband, to the internet, to be able to use it. And that is what is going to cause more progress, better capitalism will work better in such an environment. When you allowed electricity to be used, things from refrigerators to toasters to you name it, to microwaves, to televisions, to everything came of that. The internet is that type of technology, it's that type of thing.
Matt, you got to agree on some level that openbooks.com, is that what it is?
Openthebooks.com, we aggregate government spending. And we see the waste that by nature accrues to government firsthand. I agree 100% with your statement that for progress to occur, you need to encourage this competition. But we get there different ways. You say we'll regulate it into existence. That doesn't work. Look at the most controversial segment of this new bill is Title II, which classifies broadband and ISPs, the delivery mechanisms, as a telecommunications service, as opposed to, as it was, which was an information service. The internet was an information service.
But it's more than an information service now. Yes, it really is a telecommunications service.
But as an information service, it was largely untouched, and look at what has developed. Now by creating it, classifying it as a telecommunications service, I was not 100%, I was being a little facetious with Netflix as the big winner. The big winner is the government, because as a telecommunications service, you can now tax it in all sorts of different ways. And taxing is the most counter-stimulative regulation. If you look at the taxes in consumption in all of their telecommunication products, they have all gone straight up.
I'm going to stop you there just because we're running out of time. Let me turn to our friend in Brooklyn, Dr. Jonathan Askin. Give me your final thought on net neutrality.
10 years ago, the FCC abdicated its control over telecommunications, and we are now finally unscrambling the egg and making it clear that it should be the user who can control their internet experience and not that gatekeeper. That's all we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that the user has access to the infinite supply of content and media, the richness of the whole internet, and that can't happen if there's a single or a two-entity gatekeeper through the opening. Okay,
John, I'm going to hold you there, and I'm going to move on to Jose Lopez. Final thought, 10 seconds.
My final thought is government is for the people. It looks out for the people. Yes, there be extra taxes, be extra things, but who do you want regulating? Verizon and these major companies, how are they going to regulate themselves when they're profit-driven? The government is not about the profit-driven. It's about the betterment of society. So I think there has to be some regulation in there. I think what Tom Wheeler and President Obama are doing is where it needs to be going.
10 seconds, final thought, Matt.
I look at this conversation, and it's very reminiscent of Obamacare conversation. We're going to regulate choice and cost into the equation, and what's happened is there's less choice and the costs are going up. This is the exact same thing that's going to happen in telecommunications.
And in a fair market, there's a lot of pressure on New York City to drive down the cost of internet access. In Manhattan, I get it for $14.99 a month. So sometimes the free market works, but we will continue to talk about this as the days go on. When we come back, it is the lightning round for America's top anchorman, who seems to be a liar, liar, pants on fire, to the best Super Bowl commercials when we return.